Hi, in this video I will give an overview of web programming. So in this tutorial I will give a brief overview of web programming in general, HTML, CSS, JavaScript and different libraries and frameworks, both on the client side or front end and on the server side or back end. So here is a short overview of the contents of this tutorial. First a short introduction to the web, internet, web technology, etc. Then an introduction to HTML, CSS, JavaScript, different web development frameworks. We start on the server side with frameworks like PHP, ASP.NET Core, Django, etc. Then an overview of JavaScript frameworks. Mostly these frameworks are used on the client side or the front end. Some examples are Node.js, React, TypeScript, Angular, etc. So let's start with an introduction. So here you see some web and web technologies. There are overwhelming amount of web and web technologies and programming languages, frameworks, libraries, etc. This tutorial will give a brief overview of some of them, but there are lots to choose between, and it may be difficult to choose the correct tools to use for different purposes. Let's start with some history of internet and web. We got the internet in the 60s, then we got the first PC in 1981, this IBM personal computer. Then the World Wide Web, which is the internet as we know it today, was created in 1990. Then we got the first web browser in 1994. This was the Netscape web browser. We got Google and Google Search in 1998. Then we got Facebook in 2004. We got smartphones and iPhones in 2007. We got tablets, etc. And also in 2024 we got this new era of artificial intelligence and ChatGPT, etc. So basically internet made it possible to connect to computers all over the world. But first in 81 we got actually computers that we could connect to the internet, at least personal computers that we could use at home. Then before that the internet was just not so much used until we get this World Wide Web, which I guess is the foundation for the web as we know it today, where we have web pages with hyperlinks, etc. And also then we got this first web browser, which made it possible to browse through web pages using these web browsers. And the first web browser was this Netscape web browser, which came in 94. Then of course when it became many web pages and lots of information on the internet, then Google made it possible to search through all these web pages to find relevant information. Then of course we got this social networking with Facebook. It was possible to browse the web and web pages within your hand and your cell phone. And then it continued with using tablets. And also now it's possible to use artificial intelligence tools like ChatGPT, etc. So all these things is important for internet as we know it today, with the start of the internet and the World Wide Web. And basically the internet and World Wide Web is very often just called the web, but these things are actually different. So basically the internet is the infrastructure, while World Wide Web is a service that runs on this infrastructure. And this internet is basically a global network that connects millions or billions of devices, computers, smartphones, TVs, etc. And in order to connect all these devices we typically need a protocol, and that's the TCP/IP protocol that is used on internet to send data between these different devices. And then we got this World Wide Web, which made it possible to view and surf between different web pages. And this was invented by Tim Berners-Lee in 1990. And this World Wide Web made it possible to use so-called hyperlinks where you could click on hyperlinks to get information that are stored on other web pages on this internet. And in order to browse through this World Wide Web, we was typically need to have a web browser. And also in order to create these web pages, you typically use a language called HTML. And then later also CSS came, where we was then able to format and present the layout of these web pages. And finally also we got JavaScript. This made it possible to create more dynamic and interactive web pages. So all these things are the foundation for the internet and the World Wide Web as we know it today. So I guess these three inventions is the foundation for World Wide Web and internet as we know it today, namely HTML, CSS and JavaScript. So basically all web pages today contains a combination of HTML, CSS and JavaScript. Typically you use HTML to define the content of the web pages, and HTML is short for Hypertext Markup Language, while you use CSS to specify the layout of these web pages. CSS is short for Cascading Style Sheets. And then finally you use JavaScript to program the behavior of these web pages. But typically in a web page you merge and include all these things in one file, namely HTML, CSS and JavaScript. Here you see a short illustration of how actually internet and web is working. So basically you're sitting on your computer, you have a web browser and you enter this URL to a web page. Then you send a request to a web server that is located somewhere on the internet. And typically that web server looks up or retrieves some data that are stored in the database. And then a web page is generated. And then this web page is sent as a response back to the web browser. And then the web page is shown or presented inside your web browser. And basically internet is a complex network of computers where you have different computers, you have mobile cell phones, you have different servers, you have smart TVs, whatever. You could have all kind of devices that are connected to this network. And in order to send data between all these devices, you need typically to use different types of protocols like TCP, HTTP, FTP, use Wi-Fi, etc. So basically you have this what we call the OSI model or the internet stack that defines these different types of protocol. You have the link layer where you have the Ethernet, and you have the network layer where you have the IP addresses, and then you have the transport layer where you have TCP, UDP, and then finally you have this application layer where you have HTTP, TLC, DNS, etc. So basically internet is using many different types of protocols, and depending on what you're doing, you need to use or know about some of these protocols as well. And in order to retrieve a web page or some information on internet and World Wide Web, you typically need to enter an URL. And here you see how this URL is built up. The first part is the protocol, and then you use this HTTP protocol. Then you have a subdomain, a domain, and a path. So all these together, if you have this URL, https blog.usn.no/about, it's a combination of the protocol, the subdomain, the domain, and the path, like this. So that's a basic example of such an URL that you need to specify when browsing web pages on the internet. And then typically when you specify these URLs inside your web browser, then typically in the background you need to know about the IP address, etc. But actually you don't need to know about these IP addresses. These are taken care of by different parts of internet. So when you specify a URL like this, google.com, typically that information is sent to a DNS server, and then these DNS servers that there exist many DNS servers on the internet, and these servers typically keep track of a lookup table for the IP address and the domain name. So then when you enter a URL like this, google.com, then the DNS server is getting the actual IP address for that server, and then this information is sent back to your web browser, and then actually the actual IP address is then used to send a request to that specific server, and then that specific server sends a response back to your web browser. So then DNS is an important part of internet that makes it possible to enter URL like this without knowing the actual IP address that is where the different servers are located on the internet. So a web developer or web programmer today needs to know about the technology that is used behind the scenes, how internet is working, different types of protocols, etc. And also in addition, he needs to know about programming, database systems, different types of frameworks for creating web pages, both on the front end and on the back end. And here you see some of the these frameworks, programming languages, etc. that a typical web developer needs to know about, like HTML, Python, CSS, database systems like MongoDB, Oracle. He needs to know about the structured query language, JavaScript, PHP, which is a server-side programming language for creating web pages, database systems like MySQL, JavaScript frameworks like Angular, Node, JavaScript, React, etc. So it may be challenging to create web applications today, because you need to know a lot of all these technologies, programming languages, frameworks, libraries, etc. So if we start on the front end or client side, you typically need to know about, or I guess that's the basic foundation for all web pages or web application, namely HTML, hypertext markup language. So you use that HTML to define the contents of your web pages, and CSS, cascading style sheets. You use CSS to specify the layout of these web pages, and then you use JavaScript or some JavaScript libraries or frameworks to program the behavior of these web pages. So I guess these three are the main building blocks for all types of web development and web applications and web pages. Then we have other types of front-end technologies, like these front-end libraries and frameworks. Most of those are based on CSS and JavaScript. We have something called Bootstrap, which is a very popular CSS and JavaScript library. You have React, which is a popular JavaScript library. You have also Angular, which is a popular front-end library. Previously, Angular was using JavaScript, while now Angular has changed to something called TypeScript, which is very similar to JavaScript, but it's a new way of using JavaScript, where you can define data types, etc., which is not part of ordinary JavaScript. And you have jQuery, Vue, etc. And I guess there exist hundreds of different front-end libraries and frameworks some one are more popular than others. And then you have the backend or the server-side technologies. And then typically you may need to use something called PHP, which is both a framework and a programming language that is tailor-made for web development. And also you have ASP or ASP.NET, which is Microsoft technology. And this is a framework where you use Visual Studio and C# to create server-side web applications. Then you can also use something called Django, which is a Python web development framework. And you have many others like Node.js, which is a JavaScript framework. Then in addition to these backend or server-side frameworks, you typically also need to communicate with a database system like SQL Server from Microsoft, MySQL, Maria Database, MongoDB, etc. I guess you have hundreds of different types of database systems today. But I guess these are some of the most used database systems today. In the next parts of this tutorial, we will dig into more details when it comes to HTML, CSS, JavaScript, etc.